back to my channel. I'm Kelsey, and today I'm going to be walking you through everything that I use in my oil painting practice. This video is mostly going to be geared towards folks who might be really new to oil painting, but if you're at a more intermediate stage and you're just interested in what I use personally, and you've seen my process, this video is going to have loads of stuff for you too. We'll cover everything that's on my palette, as well as all of the nitty-gritty things like brushes and palette knives and how I store my works in progress, as well as my finished work. So yeah, as always, if you have any questions, be sure to comment them down below and let's get started. So before we talk about anything else, I want to go over all of the colors that are on my palette. I think this is a really valuable place to start off, just because I have a lot to say here, but also might be the thing that you're most interested in. So all of the colors that are on my palette from start to finish are, and I'm going to be reading from a list here, alizarin crimson, cadmium red medium and light, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow deep, and cadmium yellow medium, bright yellow lake. This is basically my version of lemon yellow. It is from Michael Harding. It's bright yellow lake. It's a very vibrant, saturated lemon yellow. I think that is a bit more advantageous for the way that I like to paint, so I stick with this color. I think it is a little bit better. Yeah, maybe I'll switch eventually if I find a more like sort of neon kind of lemon yellow, but I am sticking with this for now. And for my cool colors, I have olive green, phthalo green, and blue, Inton throne blue, dioxazine purple, luminous opera, gold ochre, burnt sienna, asphaltum, and finally chromatic black. Some of these colors are a little bit unusual, I know, so I want to just briefly touch on my rationale for having them on my palette. To start off, luminous opera is the closest thing I've ever managed to find to a neon pink and comes in absolutely clutch whenever I want a really vivid bright pink underpainting. It also makes mixing those like tricky coral colors a lot easier, and it's just generally great for really vibrant, warm mixes. Gold ochre is a pretty niche color. It's less versatile in mixing compared to like a yellow ochre, but I use earthy colors so rarely in my own work that I find that this color just works for me. I just mostly use this color out of the tube. That works really great for me. I think it's a really pretty color, and it is less versatile than gold ochre, but I use that color basically never, so it doesn't matter. And asphaltum is a color that I actually first heard of from Ruth Spear, aka September Wildflowers, and in her videos she uses asphaltum as sort of a neutral tinting color. So in her mixes, instead of black, she'll use asphaltum, which cools mixes down far less than a regular black does. So I use this whenever I want to make a really dark blue or green or red, brown, etc. You see my point. It's a really great color to have if you want a nice neutral dark color for use in your mixes, because it doesn't cool everything down like your typical black oil paint does. And also it's just a really nice brown all on its own. And speaking of black, chromatic black is the last unusual color that I have on my palette. This is a really nice, vivid, neutral black. It cools colors down much less in mixing when you use it, like Mars black or bone black might, and I personally really like it. I think it's great. It's made out of emerald and quinacridone red, so it's just like not a black pigment, it's a mixed thing. Yeah, I find this to be a really great color and I love it a lot. It's really vivid and like it's darker than you might think a black would be, but yeah, I like it. Oil paint, unlike watercolor or acrylic, doesn't mix with water, so if you want to change its properties or thin it out, you need a medium for that. I use two different mediums from Chelsea Glastical Studio. I like their fat medium, which speeds up drying time and makes colors glossier and adds some body, as well as their lean medium, which thins things out and makes things more matte and also speeds up the drying time. These are non-toxic mediums, which don't have carcinogenic or toxic fumes, and they don't smell bad, which is really important considering that I live in Minnesota and Alaska, so, you know, you can't really have the windows open in the winter, so having mediums that let me work in a more enclosed space is really important to me. My preferred ratio for these is about 1:1, unless I'm scrubbing in an underpainting or doing a glaze, in which case I use pretty much just the lean medium. Even though these are non-toxic, they have a really strong lavender smell, which is nice, but it can be a bit much sometimes. So I use them in these dropper bottles, which has the added benefit of giving me lots of control over how much I use and where it goes. A lot of artists have their odorless mineral spirits or non-toxic mediums sitting open in a jar, but I find that when I do that and just dip my brushes in the oil, it gets dirty, which can make my really light mixes kind of muddy, and having my mediums in dropper bottles helps me avoid that because the rest of the oil stays clean. As for mixing surfaces, I have two different glass palettes. I have the one that you see behind me, which is in my Sienna Plein Air Pochade box in size large. This is a really nice all-in-one solution for when I'm painting on the go, or as I am right now, living in a place that I don't normally live in. So I'm living in Alaska right now. All of my workspace is contained to one desk, or sometimes I also paint outside, weather permitting. So having a more portable, smaller kind of workspace system that has a easel in it and a palette built in is like super great. So I have that glass palette, and then I also have a separate one that is just a glass palette with some white paper behind it and little corner protectors. I got that for about $20-ish, I believe. I will leave a link in the description, an affiliate link for both that palette and my Pochade box. I recommend both of them. I think a glass palette is just an excellent mixing surface. It is totally possible to mix oil paint on just your like regular freezer paper, but it's not super reusable, it's not super sustainable. I think that this is actually much better long term. It's just better. Yeah. And to clean my glass palette, I of course have my palette scraper. This trusty bad boy has been with me for a while. It has a very like nice patina of dried paint on it, and I regularly swap out to the razor blade that's in here. It works really great for me. You know, it helps me clean off my glass palette, and all I have to do whenever I want to clean it is just run that over the surface, and it's just super satisfying. It's a great way to take out like all of that internalized anger. So yeah. And to mix my colors, I of course have a palette knife. Palette knives are way better at mixing colors than brushes. They like just preserve a ton of paint. If you're mixing your oil paint with your brush, a lot of it gets caught up in the bristles, and you also get like sort of an uneven color mix. So palette knives are really great. I've had the one that I'm currently using for a few years now. Actually, like, have no idea what set this is. I only know that it's a Liquitex Freestyle, and that is it. I can't find any other identifying information. So sorry about that. It is about this size-ish, so maybe like 2 inches up and down and like a ½ inch across. I have no idea. As for brushes, I use a variety of brushes, tons of different like styles and kinds, but I mainly go with 3 different brands. Rosemary & Co., which is a handmade brush company in the UK. Treacle, which is I think all made in the US, and Princeton. I get my Princeton brushes from Dick Blick or Blick Art Materials. My Princeton brushes are probably by far the cheapest, but they're pretty good quality as well, but I prefer Rosemary and Treacle, which are probably pretty comparable in terms of price point. I think your average Rosemary & Co. or Treacle brush might cost you anywhere between $5 to $8, which is pretty nice. Of course, larger brushes cost more, so maybe $15 to $25 for those, but yeah, very affordable lines. The brush that I use the most for scrubbing and underpaintings is a Hog bristle brush from Treacle. It's a size 8. It looks like this. And it's pretty old anyway. So the bristles like don't move very much, only kind of towards the top, because when I just started out oil painting, I was maybe a bad brush mom. Sorry. But yeah, these bristles, just to begin with, don't move around a whole awful lot, especially when I compare that to my Rosemary & Co. long flat brush, like their Master Choice line, which like just moves so much. It's so springy and, you know, and like satisfying. But yeah. This is a really good brush for like all the primo work or like sort of painting all in one session. If you have a low angle relative to your surface, you can get really nice smooth lines. It's a pleasure to paint with. I wish I had these in like 4 different more sizes. And I also have this synthetic Evergreen long flat, also from Rosemary & Co. It's a little bit stiffer compared to the Master's Choice line, but leaves a really smooth stroke, is again a pleasure to paint with, and unlike the smaller sizes of the Master's Choice, this brush is a little bit less springy in the smaller sizes, which I think is actually an advantage when I'm painting, especially for my work, because I like really bold, visible brush strokes, and I don't use a lot of blending. So those are basically my favorite brushes. Let's talk about how to clean them. So my favorite brush cleaning soap is actually from Treacle. It comes in a like sort of metal jar container, and you wet the brush, you scrub it a bit, and then you like work the soap into the bristles with your hand, scrubbing it and scrubbing it and scrubbing it, and then you wash it out with water, which is super easy, very straightforward, and like really, I kind of don't understand why oil painting is that scary, especially sort of once you get used to it, it's super easy. And like really not that different from acrylic or watercolor painting in terms of cleanup. So this might be the point where I'd normally tell you about what solvents I use in my painting process, but I actually don't use solvents because, as I said, I only use those 2 different mediums and I don't use any solvents. I actually just use rags, your typical dust-free rag that you get from like your regular art materials store, and I use this to wipe off excess paint in between colors and also during cleanup to remove excess paint off of my brush before I go in with the soap. And yeah, that's pretty much it. When I'm scrubbing off my palette, if I have like really caked on dry oil paint on there, I'll just put it in a paper towel and then I'll dispose of it the way I dispose of all of my other oily rags. So that is my cleanup process and sort of how I dispose of excess paint. And now let's talk about surfaces. So the surface that you will see me work on the most is actually a 1/4 inch oil ground panel. This has already been prepped, gessoed, and has 2 layers of Gamblin oil ground on it. I think it's just my favorite surface to paint on. I really don't like canvases. I prefer rigid supports as often as possible. I find that canvases just sort of move when I paint on them in a way that I really just like can't stand. So wood for me is just the way to go. I like just a 1/4 inch thick panel. I think that's pretty good. I've recently been trying aluminum composite panels that have oil ground on them, also from Treacle, but maybe it's just the way that I'm like thinking about these panels, but I like the paintings on the 1/4 inch thick Baltic birch much better. But maybe that's just me. And then when I'm working on studies, I like to use Arches oil painting paper. This is the best oil painting paper, or even just like general paper that can accept oil paints that I've actually ever found. I like just a really nice sort of neutral, kind of smooth, with a little bit of tooth surface that doesn't have like sort of bits of fibers in it. So Arches oil painting paper has a few layers of Gamblin oil ground, and I think that's just great for me, you know? It accepts the paint beautifully, it's super nice, and pretty archival. It can take a lot of work with both mediums and just regular paint, just regular oil paint. So if I'm doing sort of low stake studies, I really like to use the oil painting paper. I like to make my oil painting experience just as seamless as possible. I want to minimize the thing that is like stopping me from painting. Buying already prepped surfaces is maybe a little bit pricier, but it just saves me a ton of time and lets me work much faster. So I was editing this footage when I realized that I never actually told you guys how I store my works in progress and my finished stuff. So let's go over that because I think it's actually really important. This is a wet panel carrier, I think is what it's called. It's from Raymar, fancy brand. And this can store 3 1/4 inch panels or 6 1/8 inch panels thick, an 1/8 of an inch thick. Wow, that is so hard to say. So this can store panels completely wet for when I'm painting on plein air or outdoors and transporting them and don't have time to let them dry beforehand. So opening this guy up, ooh, that's loud. I have just some panels that are actually dry in here. There are 3 of them, but I could have 6 if I wanted. They jostle around a little bit because they're a little bit thinner than they really need to be, but there are like little ridges in here that let the panels not touch each other, and like it doesn't really come into contact with the paint surface. So I don't know if I can really like show this to you without it looking weird, but okay, like you see like those black things on the edge there? That is the stuff that holds everything in place. It's super great, actually. I love this. Probably just the best purchase in terms of like storing panels ever. Yeah, and then also from Raymar, I got these like, these are like plastic divider things. I'll just show you. And they just have like these holes in them back here. So you can have the panel. This is from my most recent YouTube video. They can like just like stand the panel up in there. I think you can put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9, 10, something like that. Just lets them stand here, lets them dry. It's totally fine. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I just love it. So yeah, okay. Now, after telling you guys that, I think that we are finally done with this video. So I hope you had a good time. I hope this was useful. Let me know if it wasn't. Let me know if it was. Let me know if there's anything that you guys wanted me to cover in future videos, or if you have any questions. As always, hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. All right, bye guys.